Yeah, I think, and I think in the early days, I think you didn't also feel comfortable showing me affection in ways that you were used to showing me affection.
Right.
As a quote unquote man,
Yeah.
previously, because I think, I mean, for lack of a better word, the word that comes to mind is like kind of fragility. There was like a little bit of fragility around this like kind of newly expressing gender.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's like you were so afraid to be read as a man in any kind of way that you, I think, also like sort of like retracted those kind of ways of being in public. I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you have clearly like you have the analysis and understanding for that. You did, but I'm sorry.
I mean, I always analyze. I always have some kind of analysis about the situation.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, it must have been hard for me to withdraw because that was part of the binary thing that I was referring to. It's like, oh, I need to be hard femme now because like I need to like protect it so much because it's so fragile and scarce.
Yeah.
And that's maybe something we can talk about at another point is the femininity, the scarcity of femininity and beauty that us femmes all have to navigate in the world.
In a way, I mean, I think that's actually, there's a lot to that. And you felt like that was something that existed between us too, where it was like, there was only so much femininity that between the two of us could take up. Is that sort of what you mean also? In relation to us specifically?
Well, no, because like I didn't anticipate the changes that were going on. That like I appreciated it as it was happening. Like I liked to be the protected one, but it was also like in my 30s. I still felt like I could be protective of you. I mean, I remember there was a time early on, for a while, that you were like, we were talking about it, how you were hyper aware of the looks we were getting. And I, even before my like hormonal, like, the HRT, was like, oh, I can't pay attention to all that. Like, it's just too much to take in. Like, I'm just going to kind of ignore it and pretend it's not there or what. It's just too much stimulus. Whereas you were like hyper aware of all these looks and these vibes you were getting from people.
Yeah. I mean, partially that comes from just like literally like experience of being a queer femme of color in the world is you are hyper aware and hyper vigilant. And I think yes, for sure, when you first started transitioning, that hypervigilance like really kicked up, and I really felt it. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was like, this is just something that I have always lived with, but then I noticed like a sharp increase in hypervigilance and hyper-awareness. And just walking around the world like kind of ready to fight people.
Yeah. And I didn't have that largely in part because of my whiteness.
Yeah.
And even still, like I know that trans women are a like marginalized gender.
Why do you say it like it's
because it's hard for me to relate being marginalized. It always has been, and yet I do feel it at times in the world. But it's like I went for like, 35 years of not being read as anything close to being marginalized. So that is a hard thing for me to let in, although I know it.
Yeah.
And I experience it. It's like I'm still like there's like 3.5 decades there of conditioning.
Yeah.
I
think I bring up this sort of almost idea of zero-sum femininity because I think that's also what I felt. Partially, it's this like silent dance that we're doing where you want to be you know, in the early days, like because you are also kind of maybe wanting to subscribe to these like binary ways of being just to affirm your own gender. And I think I also felt like even though it's, you know, cognitively, obviously there are like also high femme lesbian couples. I think there's this, I think I had this kind of pressure to also be a particular way that felt like, well, I mean, you know, there's a lot more to be said there because I think one, as you started transitioning, I think I had a better understanding about my gender also because I was like, oh, I'm not that fat.
Right.
You know, that is like, that's definitely something that I kind of took away. I was like, oh, and in that way, that's also affirming for me because I'm like, I'm not actually, yeah, as feminine as you are. And I always related to being a fudge, like a fembudge for, I think as soon as I heard that word, I don't even remember how many years ago now, but it always resonated. I was like, oh, that is like chef's kiss, like identity.
Yeah, I remember. That was the one. It really sat well with you.
And I think just because I also knew other fudges in my life, but anyway, that I think this idea, so I think I also held back because I felt like that's how I should be, even though maybe that also felt a little bit unnatural. And I think it's a beautiful thing that, you know, your transition, it wasn't the only thing, but it definitely brought on some, I think, just exploration for both of us and maybe invited a little bit more exploration from me as well. But I think there is something to it where, you know, you kind of feel like in a relationship, there's like a limited amount of femininity and you cannot have too much or something.
Yeah, and that's so silly, right? Like there's the lipstick lesbians that like, you know, just there's all this femininity happening and that there's nothing, it's not scarce, it's not a competition, it's not. But we did settle into our our gender expressions throughout this transition, this relational transition, because of, you know, you realizing more in relation to me about your futchness and me, you know, settling into, yeah, there's a high femme aspect of me and I'm a bit of a tomboy.
Yeah.
And that's not being a futch. It's different, you know?
But that took a while for you to almost be okay with accepting that part of yourself. I feel like, I don't know, say 3 years ago, if I try to be like, but you have this side of you, I feel like you, again, because of some of the early fragility, I think you might have just felt like maybe like invalidated in your femininity.
Oh yeah, and you felt that from me, obviously. Yeah. But we both knew that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes and no. I don't think I always knew, right? Because you can't really know sort of like what your transness will blossom into. So I don't think I really knew. I think I was also, but in a kind of related but slightly different way, I think I felt concerned a little bit that you would like abandon all parts of yourself that existed also before transition, before realization and transition, which I'm like, you know, of course there are parts of you that it's okay. You're like, that wasn't, you know, it felt like I was trying to perform my assigned gender at birth. Like that's what I was trying to do. And there's just parts of you that are just so deeply who you are that you don't have to abandon. I think, you know, we've definitely had a lot of conversations about there being this narrative about like, you know, dead name and even that kind of those words themselves are like suggest like all parts of yourself previous are like dead, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously like trans people, gender diverse people who've changed their name don't necessarily relate to the word dead name that way because it is just the name. But that is the tendency. That was a tendency for me to like kind of almost do away with the old self and dismiss the old, pre-transition self when it wasn't realistic and it wasn't warranted. And there's plenty of really good aspects of my pre-transition self that I wanted to retain. That took me a while to realize that I wanted to retain. And I'm really thankful that I've seen on, I don't remember what it was, but some article about this, this youth who was a trans girl, but identify as a tomboy, and it's like, oh, that really resonates. that hits it, there's, you don't have, it's not all about this, it's not this binary thing. You can find what works for you. And in a way, in that way, I've always been a tomboy, So that was a part that I can I feel much more comfortable retaining now.
And claiming. I think, and I think that's also what I really appreciate about the expanding narratives about transition and transness is there's something about, and that people can acknowledge sometimes when you start to transition, you're gonna go maybe the extra mile or extra few miles, and that makes also a lot of sense. You kind of are let me go over here and see all the way and see how that feels.
Yeah.
And then also to kind of, reclaim and integrate parts of yourself. And I think part of my, I'm sure part of my concern when I said I didn't want you to abandon all parts of yourself, of course, it's always also there's something about me and our relationship as well, right? Because I think just along with sort of our changing dynamic and kind of how we are perceived in public, I think that, there was a lot of sort of fear about, what if our relationship or our dynamic changes to a point where either we don't like it anymore or it feels unnatural, or I think also kind of didn't want to feel like it's all we had was not real.
Oof. Yeah. That's so dark. Yeah. And
It's sad.
And initially that fragility, increased or perpetuated that, we don't have that dynamic anymore. And I feel bad for that because since then, I think that some of it has been retained. And it was just such a tender time. And I know that a lot of relationships don't withstand those changes. I feel so lucky to still be with you. And to navigate these changes in our relationship together with the ups and downs and the fragility and the different ways of being and the hypervigilance at times in public and all that stuff being navigated. We've come a long way. And it feels again, I always think back, when I first came out and told you in the car, I knew it was safe. And I knew that in my heart I wouldn't want to lose you, and I wasn't going to. And that's a really wild thing to assert to oneself. Now that I look back in retrospect, it's but so many couples don't get through that. But I felt this, I don't even know how to say it. It was the safety. It was oh no, this will be okay in the end. And it has, lo and behold, been the case. But it's a wonder that it's happened that way. Because really, it really takes that transition to be aligned for both parties, for it to work as it has for us.
It is odd sometimes when you think back and sort of this like certainty that we individually and collectively had. And of course, as I say this, I'm talking about, also some of the things that were happening in the back of your mind that I think when you are, I do really feel like when maybe especially the first year, like we were in more or less survival mode. And I think like there was a lot that, maybe there were some things happening in the back of our minds, or I think definitely, we've talked about this as well, where it's like, is this transition, your gender transition, going to like address all of our issues pre-transition? And that hasn't been the case necessarily. And of course, there's a lot that's really just like helped us. I think part of it is not like the transition in and of itself, but the fact that we were able to get through something like that, it was like another kind of sign that like we've already gone through a lot of hard things together in our relationship. So therefore, this is like probably another thing that we can go through. But like I think, just like you kind of had this certainty of this is probably going to be okay. I think like, I think like, maybe very initially I was kind of like, okay, does this mean like your realization and transition mean that you don't want to be in this relationship anymore? But it wasn't never like me kind of being like, oh, okay, well, I guess like this means the end, or like this is not going to work out. Like I always also felt like this is going to be okay. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah, and I did feel that doubt or that fear from you towards me about me changing so dramatically that I wouldn't want to be in a relationship. And I remember times when I would be like, no, like that's not the case. This doesn't, and that's not the case. And like my transition didn't fix all the things, all the dynamics, but I do remember much of our big conflicts, fights, being fueled by this fragile masculinity and this misery attached to not, knowing all those things, not being aligned, and like having to be in the world a certain way. Yeah, I don't know. Obviously my hormones have changed with like the way I feel, the way I think about things, the way I interpret some information in the world is different. It's more tender, it's more sensitive, it's more attuned, if I will, and that really feels all aligned, and I think that's helped us. I feel like I didn't have that access, that way of looking at the world before. There were bits and pieces of it happening, but it's gone full bloom since then. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a lot that also, I don't know why I feel like almost a cliche, but just like a lot of healing that I had to do, and that I had started even before your transition, or kind of also my coming out. Like there was just some things that were really kind of even like early on in our marriage that like gave me big like indicators to like, okay, well, this is probably not all like about us. There's some things I need to go and
Right.
and work on my own.
Process.
So yeah, I think that it's just kind of, I guess, we're lucky and it's beautiful that those things were able to happen in conjunction. And why not? I feel like you were also doing, yeah, a lot of like healing in your own way, you know? So it just kind of gave us both. And because we were able to just, I think, you know, over the years of also kind of maybe like sharing the wisdom from our own healing work. I would say definitely like sharing a lot of the wisdom that I got from my therapist, for instance, that helped us also have just more language to talk about what was happening. And rather than just kind of going into it as like, it's like you versus me, that dynamic, but it's like, what is happening here? And, you know, sort of like, well, I guess like analyze it. It's my favorite thing to do, apparently.
Well, just like looking at the dance, right?
Yes.
It wasn't just, you know, I definitely had my stuff, but you had your stuff you were bringing into those conflicts and those times.
Of course.
And
yes.
yeah, I, of course, you know, appreciate you doing that work. It's helped us all the more. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I feel like there's a lot of kind of relationship transition that's happened in the last 4 years. But I think it kind of makes sense. Like, I think all of our senses were a lot more heightened in the first year or two of navigating the world. And also, like I said, kind of this like, we're not maybe verbalizing so much. Like, for instance, you were not saying to me, like, I want you to act like a man, you know? Right. It's like, but I already knew that, you know? I already kind of like clued in that might be more affirming. And I think it is interesting because now it's a little bit like second nature. I don't think about it so much, but
think about
like like, for instance, like putting my hand on your back.
Right.
That's not something that I consciously think about.
You're not trying to affirm me when you do that. It's just the way you like want.
Yeah, it's just kind of
how it feels like
we
very
are.
natural.
Yeah. But I think there was just more this kind of like calculated gesture, touch that were happening.
Yeah, it was very intentional in public. It was very like, okay, I'm going to place my hand here now. This will be affirming.
And you're like, thank you for doing that. That this is in fact very affirming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to say about maybe like kind of your favorite part of our relationship transition? Like a favorite moment?
I mean, there's lots. It's hard to pinpoint like one kind of dynamic. It's so like holistic. But like, I mean, I mentioned the dizziness before, and that's definitely like,
It's really your favorite thing.
I feel okay. It's not my favorite.
I'm just kidding.
But also just like being cute, being... I don't know, feeling like in my body, feeling sexy and having you like really affirm that. Like it doesn't like, even when I'm not even like trying to be or trying to like, or even feeling that like great in my body, or I'm just kind of like doing my thing, I'm getting ready or something, and sometimes you'll look at me and it's like, what? And you're like, hey.
So it's how I look at you. It's actually a little bit. I mean, that also makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's a little bit the looks I give you.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was like maybe some of that happening when I was cute prior to my transition. But I didn't know what to do with it. It was like leaking out, so to speak. It wasn't in public. And like now it's just like, well, it happens whenever. and it doesn't, it's way more natural. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a really convoluted answer, I feel, but
No, I don't think so.
I like the way you look at me.
That is a much simpler way of saying it. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Do you like the way I look at you?
Yeah, obviously.
Oh.
I love you.
I love you too.